It's awful quiet in the council room. Ah, Mike, it's me, Bill.
I see you, Bill. What can I do for
Okay,
you?
good. I just wanted to check the sound. Thank you.
Okay, all right.
Boy, we're lucky to have quorum.
All right, I'd like to call to order this special meeting of the Council of the Corporation of the Municipality of Kincardine at 5 p.m. on February 12th, 2024 in the council chambers at the Municipal Administration Office. We begin with roll call, and I would like to acknowledge that we are missing some of our council members for illness, or one councillor is here via Zoom. We appreciate that. But we do have a quorum, and we will continue our conversation. So we have Deputy Mayor Clark.
Present.
Councillor Blackwell.
Present.
Councillor Kavanaugh. Councillor Hinchberger.
Present.
Councillor Kennedy. Councillor Prenger.
Present.
Councillor Steinoff Gray. Councillor Stewart.
Present.
Okay, and I'd like to acknowledge our staff members that are here as well this evening to assist us in this budget conversation. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are meeting on the traditional lands and treaty territory of the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, which includes the Chippewas of Nawash, unceded First Nation, and the Chippewas of Saugeen First Nation, whose ancestors were the first to inhabit, care for, and live on this land. As a public service organization, we are dedicated to learning and acknowledging Indigenous history and culture, and we are committed to actions that move us towards a journey of truth, healing, and reconciliation with the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, the Métis Nation of Ontario, and the historic Saugeen Métis. Once again, I'd like to remind any councillors to declare a pecuniary interest in the general nature thereof, either now or as it arises in the meeting. And we begin, of course, with the business for which this special meeting is called, which is our 2024 continuing budget deliberations. And I'd call on our Director of Corporate Services, Roxana Bauman, to lead us off in our discussion.
Okay, thank you. So I've been asked by the mayor to provide some additional information with respect to reserve funds and with respect to asset management plan as a review. And so that is the purpose of just providing this information to council and to the public, and hopefully be able to answer some questions if needed. So just to take it at a high level, how are capital projects funded? So capital projects are primarily funded through property taxes. And that would be, and this is talking about for projects that are tax supported, they're not the water and sewer projects. So for tax supported projects, we have previous taxpayer contributions. So this is how the existing reserve funds were built up. So as you've seen in the budget report, there's a large listing of reserve funds that exist. A lot of them are a result of amalgamation, and some of them we still contribute to regularly. And the accumulation of property taxes saved over time have been deposited into those reserve funds, and that's how we've established a lot of those balances there. There's also projects that are funded from current taxpayer contributions. So this would be the property taxes that are raised in the current year that are transferred to reserve funds. So for example, the 2024 budget includes a transfer to the Life Cycle Reserve Fund currently in the amount of 4.35 million. So this amount is included in the operating budget as a transfer to the reserve fund, or it's considered to be an expense. So it's adding on to the overall operating budget cost. And then you have future taxpayers. So in some cases, the municipality would not have sufficient reserve funds available to pay for large capital projects, and therefore we need to borrow for that externally. But the annual debt repayments would have to be included in the operating budget. So the annual principal and interest payments have to be included in the budget, and therefore those are paid through by the current property taxes. And that again is for non-water and sewer assets. So I know in some cases you'll see, you've heard me say before, well, if you cut projects off the capital budget list, you're not going to see an immediate savings. You're not going to see the tax rate go down. And the reason I say that is because the way we do our budget is we transfer funds into reserve funds and from there they get transferred to pay the capital project items. So again, we have 4 different kind of categories, and I'm trying to break this down to be able to explain it. So with respect to the kind of the first item on the capital budget side, so these are all of the tax supported categories. So roads and bridges, arenas, playgrounds, the airport, sidewalks, fleet, snow plows, fire trucks, libraries. There's so many different categories, bless you. And we really only have one fund primarily that we're contributing to on a regular basis that would be able to pay for all of those different categories of assets. And that is the one that you hear me talking about most often, and that's the Life Cycle Reserve Fund. So we have the property taxes that are generated or captured in the operating budget that are then funneled through to the Life Cycle Reserve Fund and will then go and pay towards the capital budget items. There are other sources for these tax-supported projects that we can draw on in order to pay for them, and that would be through various user fees. So when I say user fees, that would be through recreation fees that we would collect for different programs, that type of thing, or rental income for different facilities. And we have grants, so are some grant opportunities that come up from time to time, and I'll talk a bit more about grants on the next slide. And as well as debt. We could also use external debt if we don't have enough money. And with respect to the Life Cycle Reserve Fund, I'm showing there that it's a snapshot of the balances that are available, and this would be projected for December 31st, 2024. So we're projected by the end of 2024, assuming that all of the capital projects and assuming everything that was decided on at the last meeting continues, there will be 8.41 million left in the Life Cycle Reserve Fund to be able to pay for all of those different assets that you see in that first box on the right. And then, so the next 2 arrows talk about water rates and sewer rates. So for the water capital budget items, that would fund things such as water mains, the water tower, wells, hydrants, water meters, that type of thing. And our current water reserve fund balance would be 9.481 million. And again, we have other opportunities to fund, other methods of funding the water capital projects, and that would be through grants and debt as well. So really how it works, and I've sent an email to council on how it works with the water and sewer reserve funds, but really it's the water and sewer financial plans that determine what the rates are going to be that we charge to customers for consuming those water and sewer, and then those rates are intentionally set to be calculated so that we have an overage. So it's intended to fund the operating budget, but it's also intended to fund the future capital replacement of those water and sewer assets. So we're supposed to make more money in the operating budget, and then the difference gets transferred into the water and sewer reserves to be able to pay for that future infrastructure. And then the fourth item would be the growth-related assets and infrastructure, which are intended and should be paid for by growth through development charges. So development charges are established based on the information gathered in the development charges background study that's done every 5 years. And that reviews the long-term capital plan for the municipality, and it calculates the costs of the projects that are specifically triggered by growth. And upon obtaining a building permit, the applicable development charges are collected from the developers, and then they're deposited into the development charges reserve fund. And it's an obligatory reserve fund, meaning it cannot be used for any other purpose. It's not discretionary. It has to be used for those things that it's collected for. And the background study is pretty specific on what types of things we can collect development charges for and what they could be used for. And it often does take time for the development charges to grow, to collect enough money to be able to pay for the projects. A lot of the growth-related projects are quite significant, and oftentimes we don't have enough development charges collected to be able to pay for those costs of servicing. So an example would be the Connaught Park sewage pumping station upgrades, which were done, I think, back in 2020. And we had to front a lot of those costs. We had to borrow internally from our sewer reserve fund in order to be able to pay to do that work in preparation for the growth. And then over the last several years since that project began, we've been, any development charges that we collect from the sewer development charges are transferred back into the sewer reserve fund because we borrowed from them temporarily. Okay, so this slide is intended not to be complicated, although it looks kind of complicated. When we think about the asset management plan, it has a long horizon. It's 20 years, 30 years out. And it's sometimes difficult to kind of wrap your head around the fact that we should be saving, there's a recommendation in the financial strategy that indicates we should be setting aside a certain amount of funds and that we should be increasing the tax rate every year to be able to pay for future capital projects. But I wanted to just kind of only show the next 4 years up to 2028. So this is taken right from the 5-year forecast in the capital budget report. And I'm showing all of the different categories like bridges, roads, fire, and the amounts that we have in aggregate from 2025 to 2028 in terms of capital work that's required. And the only reason I've broken it into the categories is so you can understand that all of these categories have to be paid for only through one source with respect to the reserve funds primarily, and that's the life cycle reserve fund. We do have a list of different reserve funds, but we're not contributing into them regularly. So the intent is that the life cycle reserve fund be used to fund the ongoing replacement of assets that you see in these categories here. So over the next 4 years, you'll see that we have a total capital requirement of 58.83 million. So that's how much we'll need if we do everything that we said we wanted to do in the capital forecast. And there may be new things that come up. There may be things that are bumped, but that's essentially what we have currently as our five-year snapshot. Now, if we take the opening or ending balance of 2024 for the life cycle reserve fund, again, the fund that's intended to pay for all of these different categories of assets, we have 8.41 million. And then we have our current 4.35 million contribution to the life cycle reserve fund. That's the amount that's in our 2024 budget. And that is the amount that we should be increasing by the equivalent of a 3% tax rate increase, which would be about $600,000 for 2024. But for the time being, the 2024 draft budget just has the 4.35 million for those specific things that you see there, generally speaking. And so if you were to add up the next 4 years to 2028 at the 4.35 million, assuming that we're not adding anything more, we're going to have a shortfall of 33 million by 2028. And again, these projects happen in different times, like throughout those next 4 years, but it's basically just showing you that even though we're adding 4.35 million through the operating budget, through property taxes, we're still going to have a shortfall. And that's the case for the 2024 budget as well. When staff was looking at bringing forward a capital budget to council, there were a lot of projects that didn't make the cut, not because they weren't necessary, not because they weren't important, but because we just simply didn't have the funds to be able to do that work. So they were deferred to future years. And that's been the case for many years now, that we continue to defer and bump projects along. So, and if we, even if we do increase the tax rate by 3% annually, we still are going to have a shortfall. So if we continue on with the annual 3%, and it's not a 3% on the 4.35 million, it's 3% tax rate increase, which is like I said, about 1% is 196,000 for 2024. That number changes every year. So even then, at the end of 2028, we would have an additional 2.98 million that we could deposit into the life cycle fund, but that just still means we have a shortfall. So we still have a $30 million shortfall. So it closes the gap a little bit, but it still doesn't pay for everything. So we're still faced with having to defer projects. And so I said in the previous slide that the 33 million shortfall has to be made up of different ways if we're not going to use taxes. And so here are some of the different options that are, realistic and known to some extent. So we have the OSIF formula funding, and this is a stable source of grant funding, and it's not application based, it's based on a formula. And it can fluctuate, but this year we're receiving 1.5 million. And so just for purposes of this illustration, I've assumed it's going to be 1.5 million over the next 4 years. We also have the ARMA Wind money that falls under our development agreement, and that's about 660,000 a year. And again, though, after 2036, those funds will no longer continue because that is the end of the agreement. So that will be the last year that we're receiving any funding from ARMA Wind. And those funds are deposited into the Community Benefits Reserve Fund. Again, that's one of those ones that goes into our operating budget, but immediately gets transferred out and then goes into the reserve fund. Then we have the gas taxes or CCBF funding. And those amounts, I believe, are confirmed up until 2028. Those are the actual numbers we've been told we are collecting. And again, the CCBF gas taxes and the OSIF, they can only be used for certain categories. The categories are quite broad, but again, we can't just use them on anything. They are specific to certain projects or certain types of projects. And then we have, I guess we used to have the Bruce Telecom distribution that was historically a dividend under the formal ownership structure. And staff have always communicated the importance of setting these funds aside into reserve funds or to fund capital projects. And I'm going to touch on that in a little bit on the next slide, as well as the Westerio Power dividend. And now there are other options as well for funding those shortfalls, and that includes application-based grants, which they're not as, you don't always know when they're coming, and you have to have projects that are shovel-ready, generally speaking, to be able to move them forward, and then you have to be successful in those. And then there's donations as well. Again, we're not sure how much we'll receive at any given time. And then there's external borrowing. So there are some financial management, there's a policy and there's legislation in place that I wanted to just touch on. So the Municipal Act requires that municipal budgets must be balanced and that we cannot finance operations with debt. So we have to make sure that our operating revenues offset our expenses and that we don't pay for our ongoing operations with borrowing. Municipalities also have to comply with generally accepted accounting principles set by the Public Sector Accounting Board, or GAAP. And one of those principles is, I'm just going to say one of them out of many, one is a constraint of prudence. So accountants have to ensure that assets or income are not overstated, and we have to be conservative to avoid giving a false impression of the health of a business. GAAP helps to ensure the standardization of financial reporting and enhances the trust and confidence in the financial reports of an organization. So it is very important and it has to be followed. And then we also have a council-adopted budget policy to guide the decisions related to the use of one-time funds and the principles for operating budgets, which reflects the legislated requirements and standards. So this next slide just recaps the budget policy that was approved by council earlier this year. It talks specifically about the use of one-time revenues, and the definition in the policy means grants or subsidies from other levels of government or municipalities that are not legislated to recur annually, transfers from reserves and reserve funds, dividend distributions from related parties such as Bruce Telecom and Westerio Power, payments collected under development agreements such as the ARMA Wind, or proceeds on the sale of property. And some of the principles in the policy state that the municipality shall not utilize one-time revenues for ongoing expenditures. However, that they may be used to fund non-recurring expenditures or services provided it is duly approved by council. As well, it states that certain municipal revenues can be termed to be unpredictable as they fluctuate year to year and are not under the direct control of the municipality. The budget amount for unpredictable revenues shall be conservative in nature and represent management's best estimate at the time of the budget. So I talked about of the Bruce Telecom dividend, and I wanted to provide some history as to kind of how we got to this point in terms of why I found it important to differentiate between these one-time revenues and why it's important to put them aside as opposed to putting them in the operating budget. So historically, this could go prior to 12 years ago, 20 years ago, the municipality regularly included one-time unsustainable revenue sources in its operating budget. So at one time, the Bruce Telecom dividend was about 1.2 million. And we also collected an annual hosting payment under the OPG low-level waste agreement, and that was about 770,000 a year, got to that point. And so both of these combined would be almost $2 million annually that were included in the operating budget to reduce the tax rate. So at that time, 1% tax rate increase, we would have generated $100,000 in additional property tax revenues. So if those funds did not materialize in a given year, we would have been faced with an immediate 20% tax rate increase to offset that. So we gradually began reallocating these funding sources to reserve funds in order to develop a sustainable budget and one that did not artificially reduce the tax rate. And ultimately what happened with the OPG low-level waste agreement was that certain milestones were not achieved and the agreement was terminated. So it was a really good thing that we did that so that we wouldn't be faced with an immediate 10% tax rate increase the following year. So the risks are real and they do exist, and we should position ourselves accordingly. So this slide explains or shows some of the contingency reserve spending history. The policy indicates that any surplus or deficit is funded from the contingency reserve. And so you could see in 2016, we had a deficit of almost $1 million. And that would have been funded through the fact that we had a healthy contingency reserve. And so we didn't have to increase the tax rate by 7-8% the following year. And the intent of this contingency / capital reserve, whatever you want to call it, is to fund only unplanned overages or contingencies. So some of the examples would be exactly the one we have in 2016, which was legal fees. There are situations where legal fees can be over budget or unbudgeted, and therefore it's good to have this cushion to be able to rely on. Other things could be significant weather events that were unplanned. As well as we've had some unplanned infrastructure failures such as culverts that happened midway through a budget year, and we had to spend several $100,000 to repair them. That was also unbudgeted. And all of those things could be achieved by having a contingency reserve to fall back on. And so we really shouldn't be using these funds for ongoing expenditures to lower the tax rate for ongoing municipal programs or routine operations. And I am slightly concerned about the use of these funds for programs such as healthcare and physician recruitment. This has been an activity, an operating expense that has been around for quite some time. The municipality has been funding healthcare and physician recruitment for more than 20 years. We've funded locum houses, we funded the medical clinic, doctors, incentives. That's been a regular thing for years, many years. And we've even borrowed funds to build the medical clinic, and we had loan repayments, all of which were paid through by external debt and paid through on the property taxes. And we even had on the property tax bills, we had a line item that said healthcare cost. And we itemized the actual cost of all of these healthcare items because of the fact that they were a provincial responsibility. We wanted to show the municipal ratepayers exactly how much they were paying for something that should be a provincial responsibility. And so we itemized that on the tax bills to show that. And ultimately we had to remove it. But it was always, my point is it was always there. And if it's going to always be there and we don't have a plan to remove those costs from the operating budget, then it's not a contingency. It's a regular operating expense, and therefore it should be funded on the property taxes. So I'm just going to, you've all seen this one many times, but I'll go over it again. So this slide shows exactly how much we have been contributing to the Life Cycle Reserve Fund every single year. So it started off with 0 because there was no reserve fund set up at that time to be able to fund our assets. Probably at the time we would have had the property tax is diverted directly to fund some capital projects. So it would, rather than having some property taxes go into a reserve fund and then from there going to pay capital projects, it would have just gone right from operating to capital to pay for the projects. But we established this reserve fund for better tracking, and it's just a better practice to do. It has more visibility of how much we're saving and how much we're spending. And so generally speaking, it's been an annual 3% tax rate increase. Some budget years have been less. But the intent of this life cycle reserve fund is to pay for the replacement of existing assets and infrastructure, because it's an asset management reserve fund. But a lot of the times, because this is the only fund that we have of such significance, that we end up funding a lot of projects that are actually not following the plan. Like, it's not an asset that we've had that needed to be replaced. It's a brand new addition. It's something new. And a few examples would be the St. Albert Street sidewalks. We never had sidewalks there before. We installed them. We paid for it out of the Life Cycle Reserve Fund. Columbarium, the website redevelopment, the generator at the MAC, software, some KIP trail costs, erosion controls, and we even had to pay temporarily for the Inver Huron water and sanitary servicing project costs that were incurred several years ago. So my point there is to say that we're creating this fund for the purpose of asset management, but because it's our only fund, we're using it for many other sources, which just highlights the importance even more that we need to continue to increase our funding for this fund. This slide just shows the balance over time. So the other one was the contributions every year. This is the balance every year. And so it was trending upwards, and now it's starting to trend downwards. In 2024, like you see, the 8.41 million. Now, it's okay that it fluctuates because it does depend on the types of projects and the significance of the projects, but it's definitely not a trend that we can see continue for a long time. And this tries to incorporate both of those previous slides just to show that if we never touched that fund and we always had the money every single year being deposited into the Life Cycle Reserve Fund, by now we would have 31.7 million that we would have contributed. But because the red bar there is showing, yes, we do have to pay for capital projects on a regular basis, and so we're withdrawing from that reserve fund over time. So that's what the red is indicating, and therefore the balance is obviously a lot less than 31.7. So it's not necessarily a concern, it's just a realistic depiction of what's been happening with that fund. And this slide is illustrating the recommended financing strategy that has been included in the asset management plan. So the asset management plan was done in 2022, and it told that our replacement costs for all of our assets is 975 million. So with an annual life cycle cost of 20.9 million, and we had annual funding of 9.7 million, then that means our gap was 11.2 million. And that's the purpose of the whole financial strategy, is to show that over time, we need to reduce that gap so that we can afford to pay for our infrastructure going forward and to develop a financial strategy that's sustainable. And so that asset management plan strategy is intended to close the gap by 2032, so that by 2032, that 11.2 million will close and we will be able to be quote unquote sustainable after 2032. So this slide, along with some of the others that you'll see, was included in an asset management plan report update back in October in advance of the budget process as an intent to kind of inform the budget process that we were heading into at that time. So I just wanted to point out that asset management planning is a requirement by legislation under Ontario Regulation 588-17, and it's not optional. And in order to qualify for grant funding, including the CCBF funding, municipalities have to demonstrate that they are making progress with their plans and that funds are being used to address priority projects identified in the plans. And it's intended to inform our capital investment decisions. So what did I want to say here? Okay, so under this plan that we would achieve full life cycle funding by 2032, and that's 10 years after the adoption of the plan. And the plan indicates that our annual tax levy increase would be 6.7% for 10 years, so that's until 2032, and thereafter it would decrease to 2.8%. And the plan specifically does state that this will require the municipality to proactively increase the amounts being transferred to capital reserves during the annual budget process. So that, yeah, so the red shaded area shows that as the funding levels increase annually, the funding gap closes by 2032. And so this next slide is illustrating what has been the historical approach of using the 3% annual tax rate increase. So if we ignore the other plan and we say, okay, well, what does it look like if you compare what we've actually been doing, or what we've kind of informally adopted as our policy, which is the 3% annual tax rate increase? What does that mean to the gap? And so the chart illustrates that by 2032, we do not achieve full life cycle funding. And in fact, we close the gap, but it's to 3.5 million. But over the course of the entire 20 years, we never close the gap. There's always a gap. And I just wanted to clarify that this calculation actually incorporates the additional 350,000 that we contribute in the operating budget for fleet replacement, fire, and the pool and landfill cell replacement. So I did incorporate that consideration into the development of this chart. And again, this would also assume that we're only using the life cycle funds for existing assets being replaced, not for new assets. And then the final, I think, chart shows, it compares the cumulative impact over that 10-year period to 2032 of the annual shortfall in the contributions. So the red area represents the cumulative funding levels as per the asset management plan financial strategy. And then the blue area represents the planned cumulative contributions using the 3% annual tax rate increase. And so you could see by the end, the cumulative impact is a shortfall of 16 million. Some of, just a kind of a high level, like some of the assumptions that are within the plan, there are assumptions that say that there's a 1.4% estimated annual growth. So additional tax revenues from the incremental new assessment would be equal to 305,000. That's their estimates. Our actuals were 198,000 for 2024, so slightly less than that. And then so the actual dollar amount of the asset management plan contribution for 2024, if you take that 6.7%, what does that actually mean? We would have a shortfall of 1.6 million. And then if you translate that to, well, how much of a tax rate increase is that then to offset that? It's actually 8.5% of a tax rate increase. And that's in addition to obviously the 6.42% to cover our operating budget amounts that we have on the operating budget, just to fund ongoing operating expenses. The asset management plan also incorporates the 50% of the annual historical Bruce Telecom dividend. So that's an immediate $250,000 contribution into the plan. So that's been factored in. And I also wanted to summarize some other projects that I guess are there to illustrate that the asset management plan does not accurately represent the true replacement costs in many cases. Usually it's understating them. So some relevant projects for comparison purposes are, like, as an example, the EV charging station. Our asset management plan would have showed that replacement cost to be 6,000. We had 40. There's a pedestrian bridge. Our replacement cost was 9,150. And the budgeted cost in the actual budget for 2020 is closer to 150,000. The fuel tank replacement at the marina, that we have in our budget for 328,000, but in the asset management plan, it's not contemplated in the plan at all. And part of that would be because it probably was never in there as an item. And a lot of that goes back to that email that I circulated to council earlier this week about the whole a tangible capital asset model that was only recently implemented in the public sector in 2009. So we had to, like, and this is every municipality, not just Kincardine, but back in the day that they didn't have a tangible capital asset database. There were no assets being recorded. So when the legislation came that we had to start tracking and capitalizing and amortizing our capital assets, staff at that time had to go back and perform a lengthy exercise of trying to identify every single asset that the municipality had that was underground that you couldn't even see, that we didn't have invoices for anymore, because a lot of those assets are really old. And so it's hard to know how much something cost historically if you don't have the invoice for it. So you had to just use best estimates or industry standards at the time. So it's very possible that a lot of assets were missed because they're just not there. And that's part of the asset management planning exercise, is that even though we have a plan, it has to be continually updated. And so as we find new assets, or as we update or find out that there's higher replacement costs, then we have to go in and update that. And then every 5 years, this plan will be updated and the numbers will change. The only other one I wanted to point out there was the Browns Hill Bridge. So that bridge is 84 years old. It was installed in 1940, and in our database, it has a historical cost of $4,500. And based on the inflation and the calculation of CPI that were done in the background, it would have inflated that to develop a number of saying, hey, now it's going to cost, in 2020, actually, it said it was going to cost $371,000 to replace. So if we never would have changed that number, technically the asset management plan would have incorporated a number of $371,000 in its calculation and determination of the actual tax rate increase that you need. But at the time, we were aware of that this was on the radar and that needed to be replaced. And so we updated the number back in 2020 to be 2.8 million. But as you can see, even now, that number is outdated, because the 2024 budget would show, 2025 would show 4 million. So we're already behind. And again, the Connaught Park Diamond Lights, that's also something that probably was included as an asset in aggregate and never was itemized, so it's not even necessarily in the plan either. So this is just to further illustrate that it's not necessarily conservative to be able to put aside 3%. If we were being conservative, we should be putting aside more than what the plan is recommending, because it's also not taking into account new, that's my next slide, getting ahead of myself. It's not taking into account new infrastructure that we've been adding since the plan was developed. So here's some examples. There's many more, but we're adding on to our asset inventory. So the Splash Park in Tiverton, the All Wheels Park will be done. The Kip Trail, 2 million. None of those are contemplated in the asset management plan. And we know that if we're adding assets on, then we need to be saving even more money. So further illustrates that we need to continue to regularly increase our contribution to the Life Cycle Reserve Fund, which is what this slide is saying. So what does all of this mean? So when we developed the asset management plan, there was an exercise in there that talked about levels of service and whether we wanted to increase our levels of service or decrease them or maintain them. And there was a lengthy exercise that was done, including workshops with members of the public. We had surveys. The council was involved in workshops at the time. And it was communicated that if we continued on with a 3% annual tax rate increase, that would be a decrease to our levels of service over time. And so a level of service is just a means of measuring the asset's current and target performance. And so if the levels of services are decreasing, so for example, like a road, so if you're increasing a level of service like the condition of a road, that usually results in increased costs, but it would result in reduced failures and improved asset performance. And then the same on the reverse, if you decrease them, it increases your asset risk and decreases asset performance. So there are trade-offs. And at the time it was evaluated that the public and council were willing to see an increase in the tax rate to maintain our existing levels of service, that we were willing to pay a little bit more if we could keep what we have and maintain what we have. And so even though we are only adopting this 3% tax rate increase, that essentially means we've committed to decreasing our levels of service over time, because we simply won't have the money to pay for our assets. Also, what this does mean is that the capital budgets will require future debt, as existing reserve funds will be depleted. So we're going to have to continue to take on debt. And in most cases, this will result in tax rate increases anyways, because we have to pay for those annual debt repayments. Projects will need to be deferred, as they already have been. And in some cases, you'll need to consider removing assets from service. So you think about closing bridges, returning paved roads to gravel, and closing buildings and facilities, as well as new asset projects may not be able to move forward. So some of the recommendations to achieve the long-term sustainability that we've talked about are to continue on with, at a minimum, the 3% annual tax rate increase to fund infrastructure and the Life Cycle Reserve Fund. Cease using the contingency reserve to fund ongoing operating costs because it is not a sustainable model. Direct any dividend distributions to either the capital budget and to reserve funds for long-term benefits. And if there are any new initiatives or services that we are adding on to the budget, such as consideration of enhanced transportation services, funding the hospital expansion, CIP initiatives, those should all be paid for by property taxes. And the alternative to consider is a reduction to services to limit the pressure on property taxes. I think that's all I had.
Director, thank you very much. Very informative and eye-opening as usual. Any comments or questions from council members regarding the report from our director? Councillor Stewart, please.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, Roxana, that was an excellent report. Scares the heck out of me, but it was an excellent report. And Jill, thank you. It really shows that a $33 million shortfall over 4 years is a major undertaking that the current council's really got to think. You know, when we add assets, we almost need to take away an asset to balance it off. With $1 trillion worth of assets just to replace them, and we're talking about the hard assets, not the soft stuff, it's going to be a challenge for all of us. And I think we got the right group for the next 3 years to meet that challenge, but there's going to have to be some tough decisions. But Roxana, that was an excellent presentation for the council and for the public. Thank you very much.
Anything else? Councillor Inchberger, please.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. I was looking for it quickly and couldn't find it, but I might be off by 10 or 20 though. I think everybody recognizes the importance of taking care of your own house. I think we all members of council have different ways of going about it. Mine's a little bit more that if I saw what I thought was the same level of rigor on the need to raise funds to deal with asset management plans in the area of ensuring that we're maximizing the lifespan of what we have, I would have less of an issue than I do presently. I feel that we've done a lot of math to show that the answer is more, and we need to become much better, I think, at the nitty gritty of asset management there, in terms of things like, I'm scanning through the report, recommendations that were done or suggested in order to like improve efficiency or assess the viability things that I think if the public is shown a math equation and it's like this equals this and it's clear, I think you'll get some very clear opinions about what we should do. But right now we have, like you said, an asset management plan that has a financing strategy that's based on maybe outdated replacement costs and sort of times, and a capital 5-year capital and a 10-year one that doesn't line up with what was used in order to calculate that. And yet I think we collectively could do an improved job of showing the public just exactly like what we're talking about here. The level of service, I often hear about what the public wants, and I was trying to find the data in here, and I'm pretty sure that the level of service survey involved less than 100 people contributing. And so my challenge to my fellow councillors would be is, at the time that this was originally prepared and updated, you had the usual small number of people that were willing to pay more for an existing level of service. I don't have the full confidence that that's how the majority of the tax base feels.
Anything else? Okay, seeing nothing else, we will be moving now into our conversation regarding the operating budget. There are other issues here that we will be dealing with, but we are in the 2024 budget deliberations. And this is all because of my head being somewhere else. I'm gonna call for like a 2-minute recess while I go get my 2024 budget book from my office, okay? So just put us on hold or have a drink of water, go for a bio break or something. I'll be right back.
Leave before 5 o'clock, and so we should be leaving like at 4:30.
Councillor Stewart, you're not muted there. It does. Oh, there, no, okay, thank you.
My partner's ordering pizza. Can I get you guys anything?
You're still alive, Councillor Stewart. Oh, there we go. You're muted again. Okay.
Yeah, I'm alive. I guess we got quorum again. We need to go. What happened to Jennifer?
We're just waiting for her return.
Okay.
Okay, welcome back, councillors, staff, and public. Thank you for your indulgence. We're addressing the operating budget at this point, and Ms. Clancy, you have the tally sheet that we can pop up on the screen here. Counselor Stewart, just inform us if, as you're able to see that screen, you're all right with that, Counselor?
Perfect. Thank you, Mayor.
So are there, at this point, we are sitting with a rate of 6.42%. Are there any comments, additions, deletions to the operating budget that any counselor would like to propose? Counselor Blackwell?
Thank you through you. I'll look to our CAO and ensure that this is an accurate motion, but I'd like to move that we consider adding 2% to the budget to support our asset management plan.
Sirs, to our clerk, is that, there was a 1.5% recommendation that was turned down at our last council meeting. Is this an appropriate motion, do you view, in your opinion?
Nope.
Substantial enough to, like, is that a bigger? Yeah, well, it's more. It doesn't matter. I'm asking the opinion whether it's an appropriately different motion with the dollar value to approve it for consideration.
I would say yes, because it's a different motion. It's 2%, not 1.5, so.
So there's a motion on the floor that we increase our proposed budget by 2 points for inclusion in the asset management plan. Is there a seconder for the motion? Councillor Prenger, please. Discussion, Councillor Blackwell.
Thank you through you. I think one of the challenges we've seen certainly in budgeting over the past couple of years is none of the estimates that we have seem to be going down. A lot of our assets are starting to fall into the fair category or even into poor. And I certainly would like to have the flexibility going forward to make informed choices about our assets of whether we want to maintain them or not, rather than being forced into a corner and saying we are having to make decisions that maybe don't align long-term with our vision because we simply don't have the funds.
Councillor Prenger, comment?
Thank you, through you, Chair. I think our director's presentation today, it purely explained why we need to continue contributing to this life cycle fund. I think it was a great presentation with lots of even more detail than I've been given in the past, which was wonderful. And I know we want to be considerate of where everybody is at this point in time in terms of finances and how much we can all contribute to our community. But looking at the forecasts and what position we're putting ourselves in if we don't continue to increase our contributions to this fund, it's a scary position we're putting ourselves in, so we don't. So I wanted to at least consider this.
Further consideration? Councillor Stewart and Hinsberger, please.
Thank you. I can't support this in this particular year. We're being asked to do a lot of extras this year. We haven't even looked at the hospital grants and things of that nature. I think you're putting a real liability on the taxpayers by adding this extra 2%. We could take a serious look at it next year when we maybe sell some of the assets and everything else. But right now, I think you're asking for a real sort of pressure on a lot of taxpayers, especially the fixed income, when you start getting 8 and 9%. So I'm sorry, I just can't support this.
Councillor Hinsberger, please.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. I share some of the comments of Councillor Stewart. My colleague mentioned making an informed choice. If I would distill a lot of what I heard tonight is we've lost control. And the answer is just throw more at the problem. And I'm not saying there isn't more finances that need to be thrown at it, but I think there should be a sharpening of the pencil and some hard look at sort of things for it to do that. I also point out that you can fund your asset management program by both increasing revenue and reducing expenses, and in some cases, removing assets. So if it stays the way it is right now, the Princess William Street Bridge and the Davidson Center track, at least in 2022 replacement costs or thereabouts, we removed over $1 million of assets. So in some ways, in effect, that's an addition, an addition to contribution as well. Like, so, I see the problem. I don't think I have, enough information such that I could make a decision that I could stand behind and defend it. So I will be voting no.
Further discussion? Deputy Mayor, please.
First of all, I'd like to thank our director. I think today's presentation was eye-opening. It clearly is never an easy decision when we're looking at having to plan for the future, but knowing at the same time that there is such an economic stretch for so many individuals and such an economic squeeze on them, and the impact of any tax increase is certainly significant for some households. So it's always difficult. Nonetheless, I truly appreciate the detail that you went into today. For me, making this decision is certainly not an easy one because I can see the problem, as Councillor Hinchberger has identified. But equally, as Councillor Stewart has said, it's such a tough tax year. And I do think moving forward, there really does need to perhaps be us looking at the amount of services that we offer in this municipality to an extent, along with how we looking at some of these assets. I don't know for me whether I can support the 2% as it is, because I do think that raises it quite a bit. Nonetheless, I can see Councillor Blackwell the concern moving forward if we don't do something.
Councillor Blackwell?
Thank you. Through you, I think one of the things we're asked to do as counselors is to make decisions, the best decisions that we feel we can with the information that's been presented to us. And I think part of the challenge with this is it's speaking a lot in hypotheticals. So I can understand the arguments by Councillor Hinchberger that, you know, we don't know where we're at, or we could take some things away. I think in looking at the track record of councils historically, we like to add things, or we like to improve the way that things are done. Certainly there's constant external pressure for improved safety, improved investment in the things that we need to do to make them the best that they can be for our community. So while I think that there's certainly, and I would agree that we do really need to start putting our pencils in the pencil sharpener and really considering what we're going to do long term, with the information I have in front of me, with the decisions that we have made over the past year and a half, I feel that I need to at least put this in at this point, because there has not been enough reduction that I feel that we would be on a sustainable path. The asset management training that I took at OSAM said every decision you make is a step towards sustainability or a step away from. And at this point, I think we need to start taking steps towards sustainability. And I don't have the capacity at this point to sell off assets. So that takes a long time to plan it out. So this is what I see as a step towards sustainability. I recognize it's a challenge for many. And if there's a friendly amendment that's suggested, that's something I could live with. But I just, it's important to me that we actually plan for our future.
Councillor Hinchberger, please.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. I think one of the themes that I got from the treasurer's report too is that there's a number of areas where we're kind of out of our lane, or using a hockey analogy, we're playing positions that we shouldn't be. So it's my feeling is much based on principle, is that I feel in some ways I have to do what I can to the best of my ability to force us back into playing our lanes, because if or to being in our lanes, Because what's being proposed now is we'll drift off into, say, healthcare, which is not typically we should be, or we're going to fund new capital out of, say, certain areas like the life cycle that we shouldn't have historically, or we're going to use the capital contingency reserve for things that we shouldn't. But at the same time, well, let's just add on to what we're going to collect to do asset management. And I'm like, I just, it's like we're trying to do a bit of everything and doing really none of them really well. And so it's like this is actually the one area that probably with my background I'm the most like passionate about. I can see it, but I'm feeling like that I need to do what I can in order to focus our government going forward on what its actual core job is. And so I will be like resistant to things that just further take us out away from that. Thanks.
Councillor Stewart, please.
Thank you. Well done. It's important to look at your asset management, and we're fortunate. Just to give you some background, we've been doing this for quite a few years. A lot of the other municipalities haven't even touched it. Saugeen Shores is just starting it this year. So we're in better shape than you think. And yes, it's important that we saw that presentation, and it's important to understand how that's going to impact us today and in the future. But I think it's premature to throw money at this at this particular time. But we need to keep this in the back of our minds all the time when we're making decisions. And we need to really understand this so we make better decisions and understand how it impacts whether it's operational costs or it impacts capital cost. But I think, just throwing money at this particular time is just going to sort of band-aid something that needs a much more in-depth study. And I think with the current council, we can do that over the next 3 years. So at this time, once again, I can't support this, just throwing money at this. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor, please.
Can I make an amendment? I don't know if it's friendly or not, that we reduce the 2% to 1%.
Is that a motion?
That is,
Is there a seconder for that motion? Yes, sure, you can. Councillor Pranger? All right, so we have a discussion regarding the amount of increase that we're talking about directed toward asset management. Any comments about the amendment? Seeing none, all in favor of the proposed amendment that we increase the rate by 1% to direct towards asset management. All in favor of the amendment? Any opposed? That's carried. Back to the amended motion, which is now that we increase the tax rate by 1% to direct towards asset management. All in favor of the motion? Anyone opposed? And that's defeated. Any other discussion regarding the operating budget? Councillor Hinchberger?
Thank you, through Mayor. Actually, before I possibly put one forward, I'd like to ask a question of staff. Okay, so the suggestion is the $60,000 to support the community improvement plan is tacked on to the tax rate, which means it would generally get baked in perpetuity, no lower than that. I guess if it's a community improvement plan and a lot of these things are investments, I'm curious of what the counter argument would be that this is sort of a time limited thing that's essentially meant to be an investment to spur something and not meant to be something that's continuous.
Did you get the gist of that question, or would you like it paraphrased again?
Through you, Mayor. Yes, I don't quite understand what you're saying, Councillor Hinchberger.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. I can use an example, just hypothetically. So you might have like a couple of reserve funds, like affordable housing and or the West Stereo Power one, that there's been some discussion of rolling it all into, and these two really have had seemingly not a lot of purpose in life. So I guess my question is, why propose an increase in the tax rate when you could take two little reserve funds that essentially probably combined have twice the amount of the ask in 2024 and apply it towards community improvement plan initiatives?
So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the question that I heard in there, is this intended to be an ongoing operational expense for the community, or is it a one-of, is that a little bit of the answer in there that you're
It,
looking for?
it is, but not in a time frame of 1 year. I realize that it will probably extend beyond that, but I see this as something that you never want to get into a case where the system becomes dependent on an infusion of cash in order to prompt something. I think the hope is that, or that at some point you throw the stimulus at it and it eventually becomes self-sustaining. So you're correct, but I don't have any illusions that this would be a 1-year thing.
I didn't know whether our CIO or yourself wanted to answer this, manager. You two can figure that one out.
I think the question is primarily, through you, Mayor, the question is primarily, what's the appropriate funding source? Yeah, so the recommendation from staff is that this has come out of operating budget as part of the tax rate increase. Because of the nature of the fact that you have put forward a plan that's been approved by the province, that you would have a number of different types of grant opportunities. The idea being, perhaps you're not going to fund something every year. Perhaps there are years you would want to increase, or perhaps there would be years you don't want to fund that through your operating budget. But it is staff's recommendation that this be part of your operating cost. It can be something that is considered on an annual basis, and I'm fairly confident in the presentation from staff that it was something that we expected would be an ongoing conversation, not necessarily a rollover, but the funding source. I think staff's recommendation would remain the same.
Was there a motion connected to that answer?
Let me find my page.
Okay,
I have it.
I'll give you a minute. Sure.
Just to be clear, Mayor, it's Bill Stewart here.
Yes, Councillor.
Right now, this is not part of the operating budget. It was proposed at 60,000, correct?
That's correct.
This is correct.
And it's not part of the operating budget. It hasn't been approved yet. Thank you. Sorry, I don't have my book with me today either.
All right. So I would move that council direct staff to include funding of the community improvement plan initiatives for a total of $60,000 via the operating budget in 2024.
The seconder for that, Councillor Blackwell. Councillor Hinchberger, comment?
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Some might wonder, Councillor Hinchberger, based on what you just did in the previous motion, what are you doing now? It did run through. See, I see this one as there is from what we saw, a very well-defined and thought out community improvement plan in terms of options and what we might actually do this. And this actually looks to me as more of an investment than a cost. And that the $60,000, say in 2024, depending on what council, how it should use to direct it, if some case in some way it might result in, say, more affordable housing or improvements to commercial, you end up getting into things which affect assessment values, increase the tax base. You may actually get a return on it, as opposed to the other one, the way right now just kind of seemed not that clear to me. Thanks.
Councillor Blackwell, please.
Thank you. Through you, one of my conversations around the CIP initiatives was right now, generally, if there's a surplus in our operating, it goes into our contingency fund. And the goal with this, I think, as Councillor Hinchberger alluded to, is the goal for this is really to stay as potential grants. And with the building cycle happening the way it does, it may not always align up yearly. So what I'm wondering about, and I guess I can direct this to our director, is whether we could have this fund not necessarily be a line item in operating as a operating expense perhaps, but as something that gets deposited into a CIP reserve fund so that it could accumulate over the years if it's not all accessed that year.
Through you, Chair. Yeah, this is the type of thing that we would not just automatically put into like the surplus deficit for the year. We would segregate those funds and make sure that they're tracked appropriately for these initiatives. So it could either be a reserve fund separate for this, or it could be just earmarked for that, but we wouldn't definitely not just automatically roll it into the contingency reserve.
Right. Oh, Councillor Stewart, please.
Yeah, I like the program. I've been involved with the program with the staff and everything. I do think we need to fund it. Also, we get funding actually from county on some of this continuous improvement program. But I'm just a little bit concerned about the budget this year. And, a lot of times this could be one-off and everything else. Like you said, sometimes you're not going to use it, and sometimes we might need 300,000 if we all agree to it. Could we do a friendly amendment and make that versus 60 about 30,000 for this year? Because it's just a start. We're bringing Tiverton, the rest of the community. I think that it'd be prudent maybe to go to 30,000 with our tax base. And if we need more, we always could go to the contingency fund. But right now, we don't really know what.
Councillor, I'm going to interject. Bet you'd like to make that a motion, wouldn't you?
Yes, friendly amendment to make it 30 versus 60. Thank you.
Is there a seconder for that? Deputy Mayor Clark, discussion about the amendment itself? Councillor Pranger.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I'd like to hear from staff if they think that we need the full 60 this year. Like, do we have things planned that will take that much money, or can we get away with the 30?
Good question. Director or manager, sorry.
Through you, Mayor Craig, we will be coming back to council with a report that actually on February 14th around the whole CIP in general for approval. And then we'll be coming back again with recommendations around the priorities to focus on. We put 60,000 out there just based on some conversations we had with others. It's really council's discretion around what we focus on and how much we do. It's a starting point. It definitely is a starting point. Some municipalities have a lot more money that are put into their CIPs and some don't put any, depending upon what the situation, the context is.
So if I can paraphrase that, 60,000 might be enough, might not be nearly enough. We don't know. It's kind of a judgment call for us this year. I'm sorry, that was vaguely well put. It was the right answer. It was the right answer, but totally right answer. Councillor Blackwell, you had a question.
Thank you. Through you, perhaps not so much a question, but a comment. I think one of the, I don't want to say criticisms, but I think one of the perspectives that's sometimes heard in the community is that we create all these great plans and then we don't actually invest in them to action them. And I think given the priority many of us placed on affordable housing when we were running, this is really an area where we can have an impact on affordable housing by offsetting things like building fees or building permit fees or application fees or however it looks in our CIP. For us wanting to stay in our lane as well, this feels like an area that is our lane. And I think it's important that we put the funds aside so that we aren't forced every year to have the conversation of do we add a little bit more, do we add a little bit more, and end up with a program that is somewhat cut off at the knees rather than what it could actually be if we are to support our staff with the plan that they're bringing forward.
So there's a amendment on the floor that we reduce the proposed amount to 30,000 All in favor of that amendment?
No, he had his hand up, I think.
I'm yes, please. Yes.
Is yes. So is there, okay, all in favor of the amendment?
Yes.
And that opposed? And that's defeated. So we have a motion on the floor that we include 60,000 in the proposed operating budget for CIP budgeting. All in favor of that motion? Anyone opposed?
I am opposed, Bill.
And that's carried. So that increases the proposed operating tax rate to 6.73. Any further discussion regarding the draft operating budget? Okay, just holding that thought in your head. At this point, we are going to look at the requests from Hospital Foundation, from SMART, and from the Lions Club regarding the all-wheel park. And I just wonder if any councillors have any comment regarding any of the proposed requests made by any of those organized. Actually, let's just start with one. Let's start with the Saugeen Mobile Regional Transit System, Smart Transit. The proposal came in for either a one year amortization or a phased in amortization for increased services to the municipality. Are there any motions that any councillor would like to make regarding that proposal? Oh, Councillor Stewart, I'm sorry.
No problem, no problem. Through you, I'd like to defer that and maybe ask the SMART delegation to come and present that right to council. I have a lot of questions that I think it's unfair that we just don't have the answer. So I like to defer that whole thing and maybe get the delegation from SMART to come and see us next month or whenever. Thank you.
I appreciate that that request, Councillor. The challenge with that is that we were kind of looking for a approval of the draft operating budget this evening. And I don't know whether it would be appropriate to make the invitation to the delegation when in effect the draft operating budget might already be approved in spite of what they say. How do you see we could address that timing challenge? Any suggestions, Councillor?
That's a tough one. That's a tough one. So we have to, what you're asking us to vote on the 250,000 they're looking for to bring the whole program on. So I guess because this would be an operational type of thing. So what would this impact? Can you show it on the screen at 250,000 operating expense?
Yeah,
to 1.28.
Yeah,
Okay.
give or take a bit. Once again, we refer back to some of the challenges that we're already addressing and whether or not this expansion of services within the core service delivery or whether that's an issue. You know, we do have the transportation service as it is now. Is it perfect? No. Can it be better? Yes. Is that an issue that we need to address this year, or is it one that we can put that sharp pencil to next year? And there have been actually a number of alternatives regarding transportation that think a little bit outside the regional transit system. Council comments. Councillor Blackwell, please.
Thank you. Through you, I'm certainly recognize the extreme importance of SMART in our community and the very valuable service that they provide. I do have some challenges with the proposal as presented. Currently, we're we're paying approximately 89,000 annually to receive service for 6 days a week, sorry. And this would expand that. What I'm, I guess, a little bit more frustrated about is I know that Councillor Kennedy put a lot of time and energy into bringing this forward, and I'm very grateful that he did that and that the board did that. But um, the board also approved a higher rate per ride, and I think if we're going to expand service, it needs to be within the whole region, because people don't just generally take a ride within the municipality. And I think the proposal as presented is limiting in that fact. There's been conversations at the county level, even broader than that, and I think it's really worth continuing this conversation to see what other partnerships we can have, and whether we can talk to the broader board about encouraging other municipalities to consider the needs of their residents beyond what they're doing right now, rather than us kind of going off on our own. I think it needs to be a part of the broader conversation.
Deputy Mayor, please, and then Councillor Stewart following.
Thank you, Mayor, through you. I think this budget cycle, this council have made it very clear their support of accessibility in just how much they have budgeted for that. I have concerns, I suppose, similar to perhaps Councillor Stewart, just with regards to unanswered questions, looking at the ownership of the vehicle itself, how that would be recorded, who owns it. I would really appreciate, I think, the opportunity to ask some further questions. There's no doubt that I would support an expansion of the service. Regrettably, I think the current proposal still leaves questions for effectively a delegation to answer. So as much as I support accessibility, and there's no doubt this council does, I don't know that I can support in the current format this proposal this evening.
Councillor Hinchberger.
Thank
Oh,
you.
I'm sorry. No, Councillor
Oh.
Stewart was in line first, and then Councillor Hinchberger, please.
Just a quick one. I fully support the deputy mayor's decision. And also, I think the timing's just poor for us for this year, but I don't want to put this away. I just want to really have some more information and talk about the ban and some grants and everything else. So I just think the timing issue for this year's council is just incorrect for us for now. Thank you.
Councillor Hinchberger, please.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Just, I also agree that the timing is a little off for this, but I'll say that it's not lost on some members of council that we're, in some cases, funding other modes of public transportation in an amount that's roughly related to this ask. And maybe this ask would be a better use of those, but I don't think we're in a position right now to make changes like that in 2024.
So short of hearing a motion in any regard, we will defer this. We will ask staff to make a connection with our, through our representative to SMART, and, maybe flesh it out or address it in a more appropriate fashion in budget 2025. Next question is regarding the support of the Lions All-Wheel Park. What, any motion that any council member would like to make regarding that? Councillor Prenger, please.
I need to, at this time, to declare a pecuniary interest, as I am a member of the Kingarden Lions Club.
Thank you, councillor. Keeping in mind our procedural bylaw, we can get down to 3 members before we actually can't have a quorum anymore. So we're still good. Any comment, any motion, and any whatever? Councillor Stewart, please.
Thank you. I can support this. It's going to be an interesting time for the kids and everything. My problem for this tax year is that they're asking for 125, and then the next year they're asking for 125. I haven't quite seen their contribution or their donations getting to the point that this thing is actually going to be built in 24. I'm thinking that we could defer this until 25, 26. and allow the King Cardinal Lions to go out to the community, get more donations, because I think they're only a third of their way to their contribution. So to put this money, it's probably just going to sit in a reserve for 12 months. That's my sort of opinion. I don't know what everyone else's opinion, but I'd probably defer this and wait until they get a little more money in their kitty. Thank you.
Bet you'd like to make a motion regarding that, wouldn't you, Counselor?
Yes, I guess I have to. Thank you very much. Through you, I would like to defer this 125 until 2025 budget.
Seconder for the deferral, or Deputy Mayor Clark. Any further discussion? Counselor Blackwell, please.
Thank you. Through you. One question I have is whether this is like an approved project, because one of the things that I think we can do as an organization is support the Lions to apply for capital grants. And oftentimes in order to do that, you need a commitment. So I think we can, perhaps I'll direct that to our director, if that's possible to shed some light on that, whether we need to approve the project itself or whether we can just move forward with supporting them to apply for grants.
We are actually in the process through you. I have a meeting tomorrow with the Lions Club to review their application that they have on the table for the Ontario Trillium Foundation. And so I'm hesitating because I don't know if they need official approval. Well, we'll approve it through the signing of the application because it will go in submitted through the municipality. So I guess that's our recognition that we are supporting the project. I do not believe it indicates that we have to provide matching funds or anything like that at this time. So it's premature for me to actually say, you know, what may transpire, whether they get funds or not. If they get funds, they may be back in front of council asking for contributing funds as well. But I'll have a better idea tomorrow at my meeting.
So there's a motion on the floor that we defer, partially based on the information that our director has given us as well. Any further discussion? Councillor Blackwell?
Thank you. Through you, just to make it really clear, should we add a amendment to that saying that we are supportive of the project and applying for grants, but that we will be considering a contribution in the 2025 year?
Is that a motion, Councillor?
It's an amendment.
A friendly amendment?
We've done that. Okay, I'm fine with that. I just want to make it really clear because I'd
Yeah.
like to
So
support them.
based on historic incidences, the recognition of our partnership on informal partnership, we're maybe already doing that. Director, would you like to comment to that, please?
Thank you. And through you, we've just had a quick conversation and we believe we've already done that because we are working with them through the fundraising campaign and providing taxable receipts, charitable taxable receipts.
Okay, so the motion to defer is on the table. All in favor?
Yes.
Any opposed? That's carried. And the last item that I have is, oh, yes. Here she be. And the last item that I have that might affect our operating budget is the request from the Hospital Foundation regarding funding for their capital project. Anyone like to offer a motion regarding direction that council might take on that? Councillor Hinchberger, please.
Move to table this discussion until there's a full representation of council here. This is not that's the motion.
Is there a seconder for that motion?
Yeah. Bill is. Sorry.
Councillor Stewart is.
Sorry, I don't mean to be rude, but
No,
yes.
You're very, very small in stature this evening, Councillor Stewart.
Oh, you'd like that. No problem. Thanks, Mayor.
Is there, there's no discussion on a table?
Oh, I would, Mayor, I'd like to talk about something.
No, just a minute. We have a motion that you seconded about
Yep.
tabling the motion.
Okay.
And our clerk is just researching the procedure, whether there's discussion on a table. So
Oh, okay. I'll wait. No problem.
seeing that it's not in our procedure bylaw, it must be debatable. So if there are any comments regarding the appropriate direction of it will be tabled until we have a full council. No, we don't need a date. It'll just be part of a,
Not
it's not debatable. All in favor of tabling the motion?
Yes.
Anyone opposed? That's carried. And the intent is that, it is an item that can be included on an agenda for a regular council meeting. And we will seek council's direction and wisdom from our Director of Corporate Services about what some of the options might be. I have no further items regarding the the draft operating budget. Are there any questions, additions, deletions from any other council members? Councillor Blackwell, please.
Thank you. Through you, I'd like to consider adding back a seasonal bylaw officer for the summer months. That's on.
Was that a motion that you'd like to make,
Yes.
Councillor?
Yeah.
Is there a seconder for that? Deputy Mayor Clark, discussion, please. Councillor?
Thank you. Through you, I think given some of the challenges that we've had at the beach and the level of service that some of our areas are cutting, I think this is one thing that may be a visible support for the community that they would appreciate.
Any further discussion? So there's a motion on the floor that we include a seasonal bylaw enforcement officer, funds to be included in the operating budget. You have more information, or Councillor?
Sorry, thank you. Through you, I do just want to clarify that this is the seasonal bylaw officer that was cut from last year's budget that we would be adding back. It's not cutting like further or adding further. It's just returning to the level of service we had in 2022. Okay.
And for information, how many dollars does that add back into the operating budget?
Thank you. Through you, in the operating budget, it says it would be 26,181. I think that's approximately.
Yeah, it's already added into the total. I just didn't see the, 26,200 are, that's okay. You're forgiven. That's for the extra $40. Okay, any further discussion regarding the seasonal bylaw officer? All in favor of the motion? Anyone opposed? That's carried. Any further discussion regarding the draft operating budget? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to direct staff to prepare a taxation bylaw. Is that what you're looking for, Director? Help me out here.
Through you, Chair, it would be the budget bylaw first and then come the taxation bylaw, correct?
To direct staff to prepare the budget bylaw. I need a mover and seconder. Moved by Councillor Blackwell, seconded by Deputy Mayor Clark. Is there any discussion? All in favor of the motion? Anyone opposed? And that was carried.
Congratulations.
Well done, Council. So there is already a capital budget amendment. We need a mover and seconder. The council amend the 2024 capital budget to include $45,000 for project 9457 Goddard Street diesel generator with funds to come from the sewer reserve fund. Moved by councillors Hinchberger and Blackwell. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Hold on,
That's
hold on,
carried.
hold on. Well,
Oh, Counselor, yes, Stuart.
I'm sorry, I just wanted a quick discussion on this. I'm a little concerned about our, and it's no direct thing, but we need to do a little bit better job on our PMs. This is an old generator, 41 years and older. I'm surprised this wasn't picked up in our study, the wastewater and water study. This should have been flagged or something because, these things need to be, it's just like an asset. We need to replace them. So I'm just sort of saying, I'd like to have a little more work done on preventative maintenance so we just don't actually run into these things. Turns out that this generator doesn't even they manufacture anymore. I guess we have to buy a new one. So it's just a comment that we need to get ahead of things if we don't mind. Thanks.
Thank you, Counselor. Any comment, Mark?
Through you, Mayor Craig. So Councillor Stewart's going to cringe, but we have lots of Detroit diesel still in our lift stations. The issue with these standby generators actually is most of them have very low hours. They are just run on an emergency basis, and then they're run monthly by the staff as a standard check. So once we get the replacement of this diesel, we will set this one aside, stored indoors that we'll use it for parts. We actually have a Detroit that'll be replaced at Durham Street this year during that tender. But we still have a couple left at Park Street and Kincardine Ave lift stations. But yeah, we're certainly making upgrades to the transfer switches as well that you'll see that was budgeted at Goderich Street. They are also very old with relays that are very difficult to get now. So we're continuing to make those improvements to the infrastructure.
That's great, Mark. So we don't run into failures and accidentally slip some of the stuff into the environment. So appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, so that motion was passed already. There was a vote and then there was conversation. 3.3, smart proposal for enhancing accessible transportation services. There's already direction from council to defer that until we get the information, so this redundant. Confirmatory bylaw, we need a mover and seconder that the bylaw to confirm the proceedings. Just a minute, did we do did we direct staff to do the bylaw? Yeah. Did we pass that? So we need a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the council, the corporation, the municipality, and deemed to be read first, second, third time, passes number 2024-14. Councillors Hinchberger and Blackwell, all in favor?
Yes.
That's carried. And we need a mover and seconder that we adjourn at 6:35, moved by Deputy Mayor Clark and Councillor Hinchberger. All in favor?
Yes.
And that's carried. Excellent. Well done.
Good
folks.
night, everyone.
We have a budget at 6.